I'm going to talk to you this morning on the subject of the encouragement from an obscure disciple. Encouragement from an obscure disciple. And I'll read to you from a letter. It's really a sad letter because the man is in prison. He doesn't know what his future is going to be. And he's writing to one of his closest friends and one of his helpers in the kind of work he was doing in early Christianity. And he tells his friend about some of his other friends. And you kind of have to just deal with the names of some of these Greek people who are mentioned, but stick with me and I think you'll find something of value to you. From the writing called 2 Timothy, and chapter 1, beginning at verse 15 and going to the end of that chapter. And what you're hearing now is this man whose name is Paul. He's the prisoner in Rome, and he's writing to one of his best friends. His name is Timothy, a younger man than Paul, maybe 20, 25 years younger. And he is talking to him about some of their mutual friends. You know that everyone in the province of Asia, including Phygelus and Hermogenes, have deserted me. What a way to start out, to write to a friend and say, here are two people who have left me, have deserted me. May the Lord show mercy to the family of Onesiphorus, because he cheered me up many times. He was not ashamed that I was a prisoner. But as soon as he arrived in Rome, he started looking for me until he found me. May the Lord grant him his mercy on that day. And you know very well how much he did for me in the city of Ephesus. That probably sounds like a very strange text of Scripture on which to preach a sermon. A man writing to his friend Timothy and talking about a couple of people who used to be his friends but have now gone on, deserted him. But then there was one friend who was still constant. And the man seems to you and to me to have a very strange name. I mean, if I were to ask you this morning, look, I'm going to give a sermon about a little known or maybe almost completely unknown character, friend of the Apostle Paul's. Give me a name that comes to mind. And I'll guarantee you that there is not a person in this room, I hope I'll not be contradicted. Mark Anderson is going to be my successor, and he may know the answer. But the answer to the question of who this obscure disciple is going to be is Onesiphorus. That doesn't sound so much like a name as it does some kind of disease, doesn't it? But I looked it up in the ancient Greek world, and actually it was a fairly common name. If you can believe it, there were a number of young men in the first century in Greece who were named Onesiphorus. Okay, be that as it may. But this is the guy I want to talk to you about for a few minutes this morning. Well, what is it about this man? And this is one of the marvels of the writings that compose the library that we call Scripture, or the Bible. 66 of those writings. It's just, I'm always amazed. I take this book in my hand and I say, like I'm holding a whole library in my hand. 66 different writings here. This is not a single book. This is a small library. It almost makes you think of the way in which the digital age in which we live can be compressed, and here they did this long ago. Put 66 different writings. You can carry a whole public library under your arm when you walk into church if you're carrying the Bible. Well, here is a little writing. How in the world did it ever get to be a part of Holy Scripture. A man sits down and writes a letter to a friend. Apparently Timothy must have saved that letter, and people must have made copies of it, and they came to value it over time. And when they finally put all the writings together, this became one of the biblical books. It's an amazing thing to me every time I think about it. But anyway, we're amazed that we just get little snippets of things, and we have to take those and see what we can do with them. And so in those brief words that Paul speaks about this man, Onesiphorus, what are the valuable lessons? What kind of encouragement for your life and my life here and now, in the present, can we get from the few words that Paul spoke to Timothy, or wrote to Timothy, about Onesiphorus? Well, the first thing that he says about him is that this man came to Rome looking for me, searching for me, until he found me. All right, well, ask yourself, well, where did he come from, and how far did he go, and what kinds of problems did he face making that trip? Well, we know where he lived. He lived in the city of Ephesus, which is now in modern Turkey. And for him to get to Rome, he would have to have crossed the Aegean Sea and then gone on to Greece. And then he would have had to cross the Adriatic Sea and then finally gotten to Rome. Now, why did he do that? Did he do it because he really wanted to find this man Paul? Did this man Paul mean that much to him? Did he know that Paul was in jail? Did he pay his own way? Did his family know where he was going and what he was up to? Were there great dangers traveling along those roads and going across those seas? You've got to think that for a man to travel that distance, probably paying his own way, determined to find this person who meant the world to him, come to the city of Rome, huge city, largest city in the ancient Greco-Roman world, and search around, ask a lot of questions, trying to locate where this man Paul was. And Paul says that he did this, and he searched for me until he found me. Now that's a friend. Have you got friends like that? I mean, you've got friends that if you were, say, in some kind of trouble, that they just do whatever it took to try to come to you and bring you whatever they might, so far as trying to support you. And when I read it, I can't help but think of Carole King's song. I used to like Carole King, James Taylor, back in the early 70s, when they sang about, you just call out my name, and then you know that wherever I am, I'll come running. And winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you got to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. I'll be there. You got a friend. This is the kind of guy Onesiphorus was. He was that friend who would do anything to help you out. Do you have friends like that? Think of them for a moment. Think of the people who would do for you what Onesiphorus did for Paul. And then think of yourself. What kind of friend are you? Are you friend enough to this other person to do whatever it takes that you have at your disposal to help them in their situation? Well, that's the first point. And so I get from, he came looking for me, and he didn't stop until he found me. Now, there was a second thing he says about Onesiphorus. He says he was not ashamed that I was in jail. He didn't think that the fact that I was in prison, that this was any reason for him to be concerned or worry about what other people might think. What's this Onesiphorus going to see a prisoner looking for a guy in jail? People, you say, well, look, we know that Paul was a good guy and he really shouldn't have been in jail in the first place, that he was in prison because he had violated the Roman law against illegal assembly and of not worshiping the emperor. And so he was a prisoner of conscience. And so there's no shame in visiting such a person as that. But most of the people in the city of Rome would have thought that he was a prisoner. He was in jail. He was a jailbird. He was a bad guy. But you see, Onesiphorus didn't let things like that bother him. He knew who Paul was. He knew the heart of Paul. He knew how much this man had given his life in order to see that the gospel of Jesus Christ, the gospel of peace, the gospel of grace was spread across the Roman Empire. And he didn't care what people thought. He was going to visit his friend in prison. Now you say, how could he be sure of seeing him? You and I, in our day, if we have a friend who is in prison, we can't just walk into the prison and say, I want to see my friend. Was it easier for people to do that then? I don't know all of the details. I don't know exactly how he gained entry into the particular place where Paul was being held. We know that it was not a dungeon. We know that Paul was kind of under house arrest. He was chained to a Roman soldier who stood there beside him all the time. Well, of course, the soldier changed shifts, and there would be a different soldier every 8 hours with the Apostle Paul. And we know that in one of Paul's writings, he even is looking at that soldier and talking about the various virtues of our Christian lives, referring to the armor that the soldier wore. But that's another story. But here is this man, Onesiphorus, who has hazarded his life. Whatever comforts he had back in Ephesus, he puts all those behind him, crosses the seas, enters into the city of Rome, looks all over the place, asks this person, asks that person, have you ever heard of this man? And does know this man? And finally, he locates him. He enters the prison and there sits down face to face with his friend, Paul. So 2 points about him. One is he was a true friend who looked for Paul until he found him. And the second point is that he did not allow the fact that Paul was in prison to deter him. He was going to see his friend. And the third point that Paul makes is that this man, when he comes, this friend, this true friend, this man who doesn't care what people think because he knows that what he is doing is the right thing, when this man comes, he cheers me up. He cheers me up. This is astounding to me. I mean, just a little piece in a letter, and we know all these things, these vital things about this obscure disciple named Onesiphorus, this guy who's a true friend, this guy who's not allowing anything to shame him when he has a true friend and is determined to see him. And now he says, when this guy comes, he says, it's like the sunshine comes out on a gray day. I just have this wonderful joy. I have this feeling of peace when I am in his presence. Again, I've asked you about a friend. Think about the people who cheer you up. Who are they? Can you name a friend who, when he walks into your room and sits down with you, things begin to look very different? Do you know someone who, when you hear their voice, telephone, in person, it's just a world of difference? You just have a completely different feeling. Things begin to take on a whole new complexion. Who cheers you up, and how do they cheer you up? How did Onesiphorus cheer Paul up. Paul says, when this guy comes into me, he says, I'm cheered up. I'm no matter how down I am, no matter how low I feel, when Onesiphorus shows up, night has turned to day. It's a new ball game. I'm at peace again. What did he do? Did he tell jokes? Did he just put his hand on Paul's shoulder? Did he sing a song to Paul? Did he recite a poem? Think about who cheers you up and how they do it. I asked my wife, and she said, you better not say this. But I asked my wife, you better not say this publicly, she said. Well, I'm going to say it anyway. I said, Miriam, what cheers you up? And now, I mean, I don't mean to be egotistical or anything, but she says, you cheer me up. You're the one who cheered me up. Well, I said, how do I do that? And she began to recite the ways, but she said, well, okay, I'll tell you the one thing that really stands out is every night before I go to bed, I sit on your lap and you scratch my back, and there's nothing that cheers me more than that. Well, different things cheer up different people, right? Think about your life. What cheers you up? And take the other side of it too. How do you cheer other people up? What cheer do you bring into other people's life, and how do you go about doing that? Think about that, husbands. How do you cheer your wives? Think of that, wives. How do you cheer your husbands? This is Father's Day, for goodness sakes. Let's talk about good cheer. I mean, if it's any day. Have you read the comics today? Almost every one of the comic strips has captured the essence of Father's Day. And one of the things that cheers me up is reading the comics. I enjoy that. A ball game when my team is playing, and when they win, of course, I get more cheerful than when they lose. But think of the many, many ways in which you are cheered, and that you yourself cheer. Paul says, when Onesiphorus came into my presence, he cheered me up. Not only does he say then, but he says that he always cheers me up. Goodness, what a treasure that Onesiphorus must have been. I mean, wouldn't you like to be an Onesiphorus? Wouldn't you like to be the person that when you came into anybody's life, when they saw you and experienced your presence, they were cheered? What a great guy this Onesiphorus was. So there are three things about him that I want you to remember this morning, and that I think can encourage you. One is that he's a true friend. He looked all over the place. He kept trying until finally he found me. That's a true friend. You got a friend. And then he was a guy who did not let appearances deter him from doing what he knew was right and what he knew was good. He was not ashamed that I was in prison, Paul says. And then thirdly, he says that Onesiphorus, when he got here, when he got into my presence, he cheers me up. He makes me feel so much better. He makes me look at the world in a much different way than I was looking at it ahead of time. And then Paul concludes. He says, may the Lord grant him mercy. I don't think that he had to wait for the future to experience that mercy. I think he was a man that knew mercy. And it occurs to me that we are living in our country at this time in which if we needed mercy, what does mercy include? Mercy includes kindness. Kindness. It includes gentleness. It includes respect and goodwill and reaching out to the other person and trying to bring joy and support and goodness to their lives. I mean, we've gotten into a situation where we we're at each other's throats. We're over here and we're over here, and I'm absolutely right, I'm absolutely right. There's no middle ground. That can be overcome if people will be merciful to other people, will be kind, will be gentle, will think about the other person first before one thinks of oneself. That's what Jesus said. He said it's very simple. One time when a guy said, what do I do to get to heaven? Jesus said, keep the commandments. Oh, I've kept the commandments, but what else? Okay, you want it simplified. Love God, love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's mercy, that's kindness, that's goodness, that's gentleness. And goodness knows our world needs this desperately. And who's going to bring it to the world if you and I don't bring it where we are, in our places? There's great encouragement here from this odd-named man, Onesiphorus. But I think there is great encouragement that you and I can derive from the life of this obscure disciple, first century, friend of Paul's, Onesiphorus. Remember Onesiphorus. Can you all say, Onesiphorus? Let's do it. Onesiphorus.